Welcome to another Killick Explains video, and this time a pretty topical topic, I don't think anyone could dispute that, which is how investors should adapt to rising geopolitical risk. Now, the world is changing at the moment as I make this video in the sort of last quarter of 2023, and not in entirely good ways. There is, you don't need me to tell you, a war going on between Russia and Ukraine. There is not yet a war going on in the Middle East, and I hope there won't be, but certainly tensions are rising sharply in that part of the world, and not to be forgotten, across massive parts of the planet, including the US, UK, loads of countries in Europe, you've got elections coming up in the next 18 months to 2 years. Now, add all those things together, and suddenly you've got quite a lot of uncertainty, which tends to translate in financial markets into quite a bit more volatility, and it makes the world seem like a less visible place. It's harder to see what the future holds. And that is manifesting in investment terms across all kinds of different parts of financial markets, whether it's instability in oil prices and therefore inflation, to which oil prices contribute, whether it's uncertainty about the direction of interest rates in response to that, whether it's currency fluctuations, and so on. Now, what makes this worse is that's not the backdrop we're used to. All right, over the last few decades, everybody's been used to universally low interest rates across the planet, 20 years worth if you like, very stable prices, no inflation, no shocks really. So geopolitical risk has suddenly risen up out of almost nowhere over the last 2 to 3 years to take centre stage when previously it really wasn't a big factor. I mean, companies spread themselves thin all over the planet. All right, they took advantage of the previous stability to expand internationally, but now conditions have changed. So how should investors respond to this sort of new demon, geopolitical risk? All right, well, I think let's have a few tips, run through a few things. Number one, it's here to stay. Now, I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not a political analyst, but I don't think it's realistic to just think that the Ukraine war, problems in the Middle East, even instability in some of the Western countries politically, that's just going to sort of dissipate by Christmas and all will be well. I think investors just need to lock in, get their heads around the fact we are in a slightly new era, uncomfortable though it may seem. But secondly, keep a long-term view. All right, don't let geopolitics completely derail what may be a perfectly sound long-term investment strategy. So be careful how much attention you're paying to the media right now. Yeah, almost daily you will find news stories about which countries are teaming up with other countries, the axis between Iran, Russia as I make this video, which side is India on, where does Turkey stand, lots of speculation about politics around the Middle East and so on. Be careful how much you get drawn into that from a purely investment perspective. All right, and avoid the temptation to run to safety. Almost every day you'll read headlines that make you think, crikey, too much risk out there, the world is too stressful, what I'd better do is just, liquidate everything and park it in something like cash. That's never been a good idea, and it's unlikely to be a good idea right now. So how are we going to approach this? Diversification remains critical to long-term investment success. Take a long, hard look at which asset classes you're invested in, equities, IOUs issued by governments and companies, property, cash, and so on. In other words, no harm in revisiting that asset class allocation. Then within each of those major classes, such as equities, we're going to look carefully at asset selection, taking account of geography and taking account of currency, and making sure that the diversification strategy we've adopted is a sensible reflection, if you like, of the state of play of the world right now. Yes, investors are going to have to do a bit more screening than perhaps they're used to doing in the past. There are, frankly, just some bad regimes out there, all right? Let's be honest, a lot of people are not comfortable anymore with investing in China. I'm not saying you shouldn't, I'm just saying there is increasing discomfort with Yes, a massive part of the global economy, but nonetheless, there it is. The more obvious regimes where people don't want to necessarily allocate capital, you'll know about from reading the headlines. There are supply chain risks. Globalization was something that happened when things were relatively stable, relatively safe, but that's no longer the case. Companies have got to look carefully at how secure their supply chains are. Whole countries have got to look carefully at how secure their supply chains are. And you will see some de-globalization, and you will need to look for evidence that countries and companies have fallback plans. All right. I mean, for example, if you look at chips, for example, and semiconductors, you know, there is a massive part of the world production based out in Taiwan. All right, that does present one or two geopolitical risks, and companies need to think about how they manage that going forward. And management experience. All right, you've seen the collapse in the Bitcoin space of some quite big players. Most of those companies were run by relatively young management teams. That can be brilliant, it can be energetic, it can be innovative against the right backdrop, but I'd say right now experience counts. Experience not just in terms of age, because older people make mistakes as well, but in terms of, are you looking at a management team that's been through bad patches in the past in this specific sector? Okay. So we have it, not the most cheerful video, but I think it's just fair to say that, you know, don't let geopolitical risk ruin what might have been a very sound long-term investment strategy, but do be prepared to be a little bit more nimble in what is a more challenging environment. Now, for more information about what I just said and some things like asset allocation and so on, killick.com/learn is my video library. You can read about some of the things I just mentioned in the guide next to me, how to invest in equities. And geopolitical risk features from time to time in our quarterly magazine, Confidant, which I edit. And again, for a copy of that, editor@killick.com.